From ABC News, This Week with George Stephanopoulos. It's your voice, your vote. Reporting from ABC News Election Headquarters, George Stephanopoulos.
Today, Barack Obama became the first sitting president to push the rainbow button and launch Gamageddon.
He's been going through an evolution on this issue, which makes his opponents on the far right doubly angry because they don't believe in gay marriage or evolution.
It's a great day when the President of the United States says on national television, gay people should no longer be relegated to only planning other people's weddings. It's not right.
He said his position has been evolving for years. And miraculously, he saw the light just in time for tonight's big Hollywood fundraiser. What are the odds? What are the odds of that happening?
George Will is off today, but we're happy to welcome in Republican strategist Mary Matalin, along with Eliot Spitzer, the former governor of New York, current TV host, Politico's Maggie Haberman, Hilary Rosen, Democratic strategist, and Ralph Reed, founder. I almost called you the founder of the Faith and Freedom Coalition. That would have been a big mistake.
I have my own faith, and I believe in freedom.
You do believe in freedom.
And you have a coalition?
Mary Matalin, I was struck in that debate between Barney Frank and Marsha Blackburn that neither one seemed to want to talk about gay marriage all that much, even though that is the big news of the week.
Well, didn't look like Marsha could get a word in edgewise, no matter what she wanted to talk about. I don't think that may or may not have been purposeful, but the voters don't want to talk about it. They don't want to have a discussion on this. Barney was right in that people for whom this is a determinative issue are already aligned. But voters who are going to be the determinant in the outcome of this election don't want to be distracted. They may have an opinion on this, but it's not in their top three. It's not close to their top three. And what they care about is what Congressman Blackburn was talking about. The state of the economy, jobs, the debt, the deficit, overreach of government, and the cost of overreach of government.
But Hillary, there was a huge reaction, of course, in the gay and lesbian community. It's been waiting for this for a long time.
Yeah, although I agree with Mary in terms of what people are really thinking about going forward, but I don't think we should let the moment pass. I don't think the week has let the moment pass without talking about how significant this is. And, you know, when I think about it personally, I came out at 17. The idea that a president of the United States would ever say that I could have that kind of a relationship when all I was trying to do was figure out how, you know, just sort of walk down the street without worrying about it. And I think that kind of clarity, that kind of leadership, it was a politically risky move for the president to take. The fact that he did it, I think, is really admirable.
You say politically risky. Does that mean you think it could cost him in November?
Well, I think whenever you say something that has sort of a lot of passion on both sides, then, you know, you're taking a political risk. And I think that the president knew that, but it didn't matter, because even in election year, some things are not about politics.
Although he probably wanted to wait a little bit longer at best before he came out with that. And Ralph, I was struck, you talk about passion. There was a lot of passion at Liberty University yesterday when Mitt Romney expressed his position.
Yeah, I think it's really two separate questions, George. I mean, one is what's on the front of the minds of the voters with 5.5 months, 6 months to go. And I think it really begs the question not only of how the Obama administration handled it, but when you've got 20 million people either out of work or they're working part-time because they can't find a full-time job. Unemployment's been over 8% for 39 months. For 32 of those months, it was over 9%. That's the longest stretch of chronic, endemic unemployment since the Great Depression. Why do you, as leader of the free world, look like this is where your focus is? So that's the first question. But then the second question, and I think the dispositive question, is where are the voters when they go to the polls? And if you look at Ohio, the marriage amendment passed by 62%, more than it did in North Carolina. Florida, swing state, 62%, more than North Carolina. Virginia, 57%. This president is going to be on the ballot in hard-fought swing states, and he's going to be out of touch and out of sync with those voters.
First, I mean, look, those are fair points, but I think wrong. And here's why. The fact is, civil rights and the discussion of civil rights does not stop merely because we have economic issues to think about as well. Of course, economics will dictate, at the end of the day, November's outcome. But the notion that we would stall on civil rights issues that are of enormous magnitude in how we define ourselves as a society is wrong. And I think as a subsidiary point to that, the public has got to understand there are two components to marriage. One is the civil, defined by government. The other is the religious, where denominations, of course, have the right to recognize or not. None of this has to do with whether a denomination recognizes a same-sex marriage. The president is saying, as I said as governor, others have said around the nation, two people should be able to enter a civil relationship of love that goes on forever.
And Maggie, one of the reasons the politics have changed on this, and this has actually been driven out in the country, public opinion has had a massive shift just in the last 6 years.
Yeah, it's been incredible, actually. Pollsters say they haven't seen any other issue on which there's been such fast movement. But what's not clear is how this will be in the swing states. I mean, that's nationally, that's
Rob's
perhaps...
point,
that's on coast to coast. I do think, as Hillary said, it was politically risky because neither side knows exactly how this is going to play out. But I think the president was taking on so much water. It was going against his brand of looking like he was nonpartisan.
He had no choice at the end, did he, Mary?
Exactly. It's not risky if you don't have a choice. You don't get bonus points if you're doing your job. He evolved into the position he originally had. He's not bold. He was for it before he was against it. Then he evolved back to where he started, which is to be for it. His vice president outed him, and the gay community was holding the money up, and he was on his way to George Clooney's with an open purse.
First of all, it's actually not true. I mean, Barney Frank was clear about that, too. The gay community was not holding its money up. This was not about money. I think it was unplanned. The vice president, spoke from the heart, and the president kind of followed that. But
wait a second. One point, actually, Mary didn't include. This was going to be on the platform, a platform for gay marriage at the Democratic Convention. The president had to do before then, didn't he?
I said, months and months ago that I thought that this election would not take place without the president having come out strongly in support of same-sex marriage and Mitt Romney strongly reinforcing his opposition. And let's talk about sort of, as the president's journey, as Maggie talked about, the movement of the last several years, the president's journey is much more closely followed the American people. Mitt Romney has devolved. In 1994, when he was running against Ted Kennedy, he was going to be better on gay rights than Ted Kennedy. Now he's against everything.
Has he gone
well,
far
that's not true, actually. He's always believed that marriage should be defined as it has been defined for 5,000 years. When he was governor of Massachusetts, and I'm not here as a Romney surrogate, this is just his record. When the Massachusetts General Court redefined marriage and
he was always against
ordered
marriage.
The government to issue marriage licenses.
But that's not the only thing that's about
But on
gay
this
and lesbian
issue,
people's lives.
what Obama has done, George, they've spent 6 months saying this guy has no core. Axelrod's gone on national television and says he doesn't really believe in anything. Now Obama,
talking Romney.
Right, talking about Romney. Now Obama has publicly flip-flopped after being dragged kicking and screaming by his vice president, and he allows Romney to look like a Reagan-esque conviction politician.
To change a tiny little bit, I think the interesting thing to see over the next couple of years, I think within the evangelical community, this is Ralph's world, not mine, I would predict there will be the same shift in perspective. Those under 30 in the evangelical world now support same-sex marriage.
I want to bring that to
and that's going to
Maggie,
happen.
because you had an interesting on your blog yesterday in Politico from a Republican pollster, George W. Bush's pollster, showing how Republican attitudes have changed on this issue.
Absolutely. They've shifted dramatically. And one of the things I was going to say, actually, counter to what Ralph said, although you're right that Mitt Romney has always been for traditional marriage, there has been a shift among the donors on the Republican side. It's not just Democratic donors who support Barack Obama, who are in the gay community, who wanted to see a move. There are a number of prominent Republicans, like hedge fund executive Paul Singer. Ken Millman is out there raising money for gay marriage movements. Romney is in sort of a rock and a hard place between his base and his donors. This is not something he wants to be talking about. I would actually disagree with you. I don't think we're going to hear him being forceful about this at all going forward.
There's one sort of... Do I agree if he doesn't want to talk about it? I'm going to agree with Hillary. I think we should talk about it. And I think if the president really was bold, he would urge tolerance for the advocates, the views of advocates for either religious reasons or traditional reasons, support a multimillennial traditional definition of marriage. Why shouldn't we talk about that? This is bigger than the economy. It's about our entire culture and where are we in the disintegration of families. Those are conversations worth having civilly and worth hearing each other's views. I don't think Hillary loves her children any less or any differently. I completely know what's in her heart. We should be able to talk about all that stuff, and I think he will talk about it, but I think the other side has to be, and the president should urge, a tolerance of the views of people who hold this either by faith or whatever, instead of calling them right-wing extremists, Christian evil people.
It did seem that the president was trying to signal that this week in his interview with Robin, when he really did say this is going to be a states issue, not a national issue.
Here's again sort of one more non-political point, which is, you know, sorry, but straight people don't need any help tearing down the institution of marriage. You're doing just fine as it is. 1 in 3 divorces, you know, come on. The irony is that really gay people are looking to do the most conservative thing. They want to fight in the armed forces, you know, to protect our country, and they want to join the institution of marriage, loving, committed couples, raising children. That, you know, I don't know that that's a conversation that the president ought to have on the campaign trail every day, but I do think it's something we ought to recognize and acknowledge.
Absent the Supreme Court getting involved in this, gay marriage will be banned in many, many states for a long, long time.
Right, which is a shame, which is why, but it will get to the Supreme Court, and the president will be forced to take a position about
which he doesn't want to do.
He doesn't want to do it, but the moment for him will be when pressure still comes to him. Will he sign the LGBT executive order that he refused to sign a couple weeks ago? In other words, arguably, how can he be for same-sex marriage as publicly as he has been and not now sign the order that would extend these minimal rights to individuals working for federal contractors? That will become an issue in the next couple weeks.
Well, and I think there are 2 things on the horizon that are going to further complicate this for President Obama. The first, Eliot mentioned, which is as the Amendment 8 battle from California works its way to the Supreme Court, and most legal observers believe it's inevitable that this will end up on the court's docket. The Obama administration, which has already, George, come out and said that the Defense of Marriage Act is unconstitutional, is going to have to take a position on whether or not gays have a 14th Amendment right to marry everywhere. The second thing is the Democratic platform. Is Claire McCaskill in Missouri going to say that she agrees with the Democratic platform that marriage should be redefined? Is Bill Nelson in Florida going to want to run in a state where 62% of his voters have said they believe it should be between a man and a woman?
Distance themselves
they
from
probably
the
will
platforms.
distance.
Well, and then that takes a lot of wind out of the sails.
On the Republican side and on the Democratic
side. If
side.
other elected officials in the Democratic Party say, I don't agree with the president, this further complicates it.
The majority will probably still support it. We got to take a break right now. Lots more to come from our roundtable.
Romney bullied a kid for having long hair and then ridiculed the same kid for only having an American Express gold card, not platinum. You know?
Was Mitt Romney a bully in high school? How much should that matter now?
Thanks, you guys. After just 1 term in office, French President Nicolas Sarkozy lost his re-election bid because he was unable to fix his nation's economy. Or as Obama put it,
Incumbents wiped out here and abroad as President Obama fighting a global wave, and Time magazine asks, are you mom enough? We'll debate the controversial cover.
Don't look at it as the source of future humiliation for the boy. Try to look at it as the event that helped shape him into the most fearsome cage fighter in the history of mankind.
We're not there yet. It's still too hard for too many. But we're coming back because America's greatness comes from a strong middle class. Because you don't quit, and neither does he.
What does White House insider Hilary Rosen say about Ann Romney?
Guess what? His wife has actually never worked a day in her life.
Ann Romney has never gotten her ass out of the house.
Happy Mother's Day from Barack Obama's team.
Super PAC ad there for the Republicans. I guess we're back with our roundtable. Happy Mother's Day, Hilary Rosen. A response.
You know, that ad I just think is silly. I misspoke. I never meant to say that being a mom is not hard work. I know from experience. I apologized to Ann Romney. She accepted my apology. And President Obama not only had nothing to do with what I said, he actually completely disagreed with me very loudly, as everyone knows. So, you know, move on.
Is this the way to close the gender gap, Mary?
No, the way to close the gender gap is the way it's closing now, just over the economy. At the risk of ticking Barney Frank off and talking about the topic that the whole world really wants America to talk about, not just Americans, women are losing jobs at a faster rate. They're underemployed at a greater rate. Everybody needs to be, for the purposes of their families and our whole economy, that's how we close the gap. The gender gap that we have is not it's single women. And we are doing fine with all the other women.
Married women especially.
I think the reason why this is going to come up is because in 2010, for the first time since modern polling began, Republican candidates won the women's vote. and the gender gap closed from 8 in 00 to 4 in 04, and they're nervous, and I think that they can break through that with these emotional social issues. But in an economy like this, George, where 70% of the economic and consumer decisions in the household are made by women in that household, they're on the front lines of this economy. They know how bad it is at the grocery store, at the gas pump, and I think they've got problems.
2 points. First, Hillary's comment, and she apologized, she misspoke, is no more relevant in my view than Mitt Romney's bullying this little silly tale from his high school. Dismiss both of them. Let's talk about the economy. I want to talk about the economy. If we talk about the economy, Barack Obama will win the gender gap by double digits. We have an answer on the economy. Mitt Romney simply does not.
But Maggie, we had a poll out this week that's showing on the big economic issues like the stimulus package, overall economic issues, financial regulation. Obama has a majority, but it's a bare majority support.
This is a real concern for the Obama team. There is not some clear marker for him to do better than Mitt Romney. To some extent, some argue that he should actually be going after Mitt Romney's economic credentials. That's not something they're doing. Instead, they are focusing on social issues. I don't think that he wanted to be talking about gay marriage last week, but that certainly is part of it. They are talking about women. They are focusing on things that are not part of his record because it's not. There are elements of the record that are not politically popular, that are not going to make voters happy.
Well, first of all, there are 2 points here. One is that some of the so-called women's issues are economic issues. Mitt Romney's trying to get rid of the earned income tax credit, which overwhelmingly benefits women, particularly working poor women. And when we talk about reproductive health, it is not just a matter of whether or not you permit birth control. When you add costs to women by denying them insurance coverage for certain things, you are adding to their economic burden. The second piece is on job growth. We actually have a story to tell, and I think the president's going to tell it. Mitt Romney is, looking at cutting Medicare benefits to give tax cuts to his rich friends. That's something that we are going to be talking about with the Romney economic policies.
If we can talk about the economy, we should talk
that was the House Ryan budget.
That's
the Ryan budget, Mary.
The Ryan budget is predicated on a Clinton concept, which is premium support. Well, the Ryan budget saves Medicare. It's the same concept. You have to infuse market forces into these. If we don't reform these entitlements, we're not going to be talking about anything. You want to talk about the economy? But I want to go back to this poll thing. Obama does not enjoy a majority on economic issues, on the voters who are going to make the difference. Research and Republicans done a number of focus groups and polls. Independents, by double digits, think he made it worse or it had no impact, and they particularly favor Romney's positions, and they don't even really know what they are yet, on jobs, on the deficit, on debt.
Can we talk, instead of polls and focus groups, reality, what works in the economy? We have done the largest macroeconomic experiment in history. Europe tried austerity, which is Mitt Romney's plan. They're going into depression, recession. It has failed. What we have tried here under Barack Obama is Keynesian economics, restructure the economy, invest where you need to. It worked for 70 years. It will work in the next 100 years. That is what the public should focus on.
This is the weakest recovery since World War II. It's the weakest recovery since the Depression.
It's the biggest problem since the
GDP
Depression.
growth in the first quarter of this year was just revised down to 1.9%. We created 115,000 jobs in April. You know how many jobs we created in April of '84 when Reagan was president?
George.
480,000. This is a finally flat, jobless recovery.
We have finally restored all of the jobs lost under the George Bush era.
They want to go back to medieval medicine, bloodletting, leeches. They want to go back to the very crazy economics that brought us over the cliff and created the cataclysm.
Created 26 million jobs in the 80s.
Completely wrong.
26 million new jobs in the 80s under Reagan.
Completely wrong.
17% rise in the GDP.
Bill Clinton, if you want to go back to Bill Clinton, as George well knows, Bill Clinton actually increased taxes on the upper income folks and increased government spending for investment in education and technology and infrastructure. That was the largest economic growth.
Yeah, I was there.
Those are the times
and the next year, by the way, we took the House and the Senate. He signed the largest tax cut since the Reagan era, and we balanced the budget.
But the president does have a difficult argument because even if the recovery has begun, people aren't feeling it fully yet.
But that's a political issue. Of course, it's a difficult argument but it's a correct argument. You know, that's why I'm saying don't look at focus groups. Let's talk reality and what matters here.
The focus groups are talking to real people. Underemployment, the real unemployment rate is 15%. You know why you're making gains in the jobs numbers? Because 3/4 of it are people who dropped out of the labor force.
Mary, we're talking. I want to talk economic reality and people actually make investment decisions.
This is not
the mantra of the Chamber of
focus group.
Ralph, hold on one second.
It's not a poll question. 53% of college graduates can't find a job.
Ralph, you simply ignore the reality that the economic model that Mitt Romney wants to bring back gave us the cataclysm of 08. It's deregulation, it's lower taxes for the wealthy, higher deficits, cutting infrastructure investment, making us less competitive, giving up our competitiveness to foreign nations, unilateral trade failure that does not serve the American public well.
I want to get to
we did in the 80s, 26
At the risk of getting my head cut off, I'm going to turn to the issue that Eliot said he didn't want to talk about before, because there was a big story this week in the Washington Post that looked back at Mitt Romney's prep school days at the Cranbrook School, and it told the story of how he and some friends taunted a classmate who had dyed his hair, and at one day they pinned the boy down and cut his hair off. And here was Romney's response.
I don't recall the incident myself, but I've seen the reports, and not going to argue with that. There's no question but that I did some stupid things when I was in high school, and obviously if I hurt anyone by virtue of that, I would be very sorry for it and apologize for it.
Maggie Haberman, we heard Eliot's view. He thinks it shouldn't matter, doesn't matter, does it?
It will matter with people who don't like him. I think it won't matter with people who do like him. I think that the question is, does it matter on the margins with independents who are just starting to get to know him? Maybe. I think that biography of presidential candidates is interesting. I think it's relevant. But ultimately, I think who wants to be judged for what they did in high school? I sort of referred back to what Eliot said. I think that he apologized. I think that's the best he can do. And I think Democrats have a risk if they push it too hard.
Risk here?
Yeah, I actually agree. I have some compassion for Mitt Romney on this. I thought his apology seemed sincere, even though he wasn't. It's a little fuzzy whether he remembered it or not. But I think the reason it touched the chord wasn't really just about politics. Actually, bullying and youth suicide is a major issue over the last several years. I refer everyone to the Bully movie if you haven't seen it. And I just think it was kind of a missed opportunity for Mitt Romney to say, you know what, I don't remember that, but this is not something we should encourage our kids to do, and this is a problem. And I think that, you know, that's something that President Obama has focused on in the last year, and I think that it's relevant.
Because it's talking about something that didn't happen 50 years ago is absurd. It didn't happen.
I just defended him.
But I'm not
saying go
attacking
forward.
you. I'm saying ABC got this. The sister said it never happened.
No, she said it was an inaccurate portrayal.
She said she didn't want to be used for
which is
political
different.
But what Romney should say, here's what Romney should say. I'm Mitt Romney. I'm running for president of these United States. I am not a bully. That's a politically motivated tactic to distract you and dismiss me. I'm not going to let that happen. I'm going to cross this country talking about my economic plan to get you working again and get the government working for you. I'm Mitt Romney. I approve this message.
Well, I think the thing, first of all, the young man in question is dead. All right, so he's not even able to speak to this, number one. Number two, it was a half century ago. This doesn't involve his public record. All right? And the other thing that it really underscores, George, is how desperate they are to try to tear this guy down. I mean, this is somebody who's been faithful to the same woman for 42 years, raised a wonderful family. Whatever you think of him politically, turning around Bain Consulting, building Bain Capital into one of the most respected private equity organizations in the nation, turning around the 2002 Salt Lake Olympics, outstanding job as governor of Massachusetts. This is the kind of man that you would want your daughter to marry. This is the kind of guy you would want to be a business partner with.
Part of the reason that you hear...
If I could just finish, here's my concern. If this is what we're going to do to candidates, George, who's going to want to serve? Who's going to want to put their name on the ballot if they know people are going to be dumpster diving in your high school or your prep school?
I don't think that there's anything new at looking at candidates, and I don't think things coming out is new. I think it is a warning for Romney's campaign that there will be much more to come. But I think that the story that you just told, and to your point, George, I think there has been a complaint among Republicans privately, Democrats talk about it more openly, that Mitt Romney has not done much in terms of his own biography and defining himself. He's done it in bits and pieces. He does have a story to tell, and if you're not telling it, someone else fills it in.
Well, the reason it's not relevant and won't have traction politically is it doesn't fit into the narrative most people think about Mitt Romney. We can agree or disagree with him, but nobody thinks he's mean-spirited or a bully. I disagree with you about what he's done at Bain and whether it's economic value is. I don't think he's a nasty guy. I like him. I don't mind saying that. I think he's a good, decent person with whom I disagree. He's not a bully. Therefore, the story is out of context. It doesn't matter to me.
So, yeah, and he will not get disqualified on personal grounds, is what you're saying in this.
Precisely.
Let's turn to another economic issue, because I heard you talking about before we came on. I talked a little bit to Barney Frank and Marsha Blackburn about this J.P. Morgan story that broke at the end of the week. $2 billion loss on Friday has re-raised the entire question of financial regulation. I know this is something you've been crusading on as an attorney general, but Jamie Dimon's point is that even the regulations, if they were put in place, would not have stopped this. And J.P. Morgan is a huge bank that can absorb this loss.
Of course, the regulations as put in place after J.P. Morgan lobbied to eviscerate them would not have precluded this, because J.P. Morgan wants to be able to lose all the money it can so we can bail them out again. That's the problem. The incentive structure here is perverse. They can gamble with a federal backstop. J.P. Morgan Chase has a federal guarantee behind it. They can borrow cheap, bet big. If they lose, we come in and bail them out. The problem is this is not capitalism. I'm a capitalist. A capitalist says you have to be small enough to absorb your own losses. You have to be smart enough to take your own risk and measure them. They do neither. These institutions should be broken up. There's a SAFE bill. 33 senators support it. This is what Warren Stevens Bank, investment banker, extremely conservative guy from Arkansas, said this is our financial services system these days does not function properly because of the Morgan Chases and Citibanks that are now corrupting our financial services system.
This also re-raised how ineffective Frank Dodd is. As Barney said, the Volcker rule, which is still being formulated. They want to enforce something that hasn't been formulated, and they don't even know when it would come into effect, as is the case with all of Frank Dodd. What is absent from Frank Dodd is what financial institutions need and they want, and they can't function without it, is clarity, uniformity, cohesion, coherence, enforceability that's predictable. And none of that happens.
You can't possibly really think that after what happened in 2008, that we should not be regulating their capital risk that banks are taking.
I didn't say that. I said exactly
the reason that Dodd-Frank is so ineffective right now is because that we had a situation where it became complicated because of the intense lobbying around it. That's why it's not effective. But the notion that we would say, well, you know, no regulation here is going to matter, and let the taxpayer foot the bills. I mean, 2010 happened because people thought that the taxpayers foot the bill and Democrats let them.
Who is saying no regulation?
The idea that you're going to be able to eliminate the risk of a global 21st century economy by writing regulations at the Fed is laughable. This is a reminder yet again that we now live in a global economy. Let's remember why this happened, George. J.P. Morgan was trying to hedge their risk against further losses in Europe. They made a bad bet, but it was only 0.1% of their assets. It was only 1% of shareholder value. They'll be fine. And the other thing, and here's the other thing. Here's the other thing. Markets work. Allow markets rather than bureaucrats and regulators to punish bad actors. J.P. Morgan lost $14 billion in shareholder value the day after they admitted this bet. And by the way, the credit rating agencies downgraded their credit rating.
We need a little bit of fact here, not rhetoric. Markets worked for 70 years after the New Deal when we put in place Glass-Steagall. We put in place a financial services system that globally regulated size, separated commercial and investment banking, said taxpayers will not provide capital to institutions that gamble recklessly so we can bail them out. An incentive structure that the most conservative folks agree makes no sense. That's the world most of us should want to go back to. When we deregulated, we went to the libertarianism of the first decade of this century. We led up to 2008. That's what took us over the precipice. We want capitalism. We don't want corporate oligopoly. That's it. It's very simple.
We can't even agree on whether or not the Volcker rule prohibited this trade.
It would.
It had 2 years to write the rule.
You can't agree. Those of us who understand what the Volcker rule should do would make it very clear. A $2 billion bet on credit default swaps and derivatives that actually serve no purpose is not what capitalism is about, not what we should be backstopping at the bank.
Here's one thing: the politics have changed, which is that instead of doing what so many bankers did years ago and just, strong-arming Congress, Jamie Dimon actually went out there and said, wow, we made some mistakes here, and we're going to clean this up. I thought that would not have happened 3 years ago, and I thought that was impressive.
There was a change in a subtle change in Mitt Romney's rhetoric on Friday. He has been talking about repealing the Dodd-Frank law out on the campaign trail. He started to put more emphasis Friday on putting some regulations in place.
Common sense regulations was his phrase. This is the pivot for Mitt Romney from the primary to the general, right? I mean, he is not outlawing all regulations. We will hear more from him in coming days, and I think he's going to wait and see whether there is any market impact. There may be another $1 billion in losses, I believe. But I think this is not a surprise. This is where Mitt Romney sort of is. He's in the middle. I don't think that when he was talking about repealing Dodd-Frank, this was, I think, in part a red meat primary play. I don't think that he is a no regulation kind of guy.
And we're seeing some other pivots, Mary, also on the issue of immigration coming out for a version of the DREAM Act from Mitt Romney. What else do you expect?
I expect him to laser focus on the economy. I just want to make this point. I'm not avoiding the immigration question. The only way the Obama campaign can run against Romney is distort his positions, or the Republican position. There is no, and nor has there ever been, any Republican position that is for no regulations. We are for regulations and always have been. What common sense means: clear and uniform and predictably enforced. What Dodd-Frank does is it gives the authorities the gauzy discretion of the regulators, which always results in regulatory capture. Madoff was regulated. Okay, we know what the Volcker rule is, and we agree with the concept, which is no taxpayer back.
All I need to say is that all the years I was there trying to bring these cases, every time I went before the House Financial Services Committee, you know what they wanted to do? Preempt me so we could not bring an enforcement action. It was kowtow. When bankers said jump, they said how high. It was the most outrageous.
Democratic Congress you went to?
No, this is the Republican
House
Financial Services. It was crazy.
Thank you all very much.